Let's talk a little bit more about those extraordinary market events that you referenced in our fish wrap episode, where you said this is, the markets have gone crazy right now in 2021. You mentioned 5 times that this happened in your career. Could you tell us a little bit more about those years and the context for each?
Sure. It's, these are situations where, Jane and I have talked about this as we built out Croptomize, but what's happened is that these 5 events that I'm going to speak about today are when we had major seismic shifts in pricing of grains and agriculture. And it's like we found a new level. So, the first event was 1973, 1974 soybeans. And soybeans went from like $2.30 plus or minus all the way up to nearly $13 in a matter of months. It got so bad that Richard Nixon actually halted all exports of soybeans because they probably had more sold than were actually able to be sold in the United States.
Really?
Because it was
way oversold.
They way oversold this thing. And of course, that's where the term beans in the teens came from, because nobody even thought $13 beans were possible, because that was when beans were trading at $2 to $3 a bushel back then. And of course, what was happening at that time, we always consider 1970 to now the modern era of grain trading and futures trading. And what happened then was that this was the first time that we had a global event in grains, and it showed just the power of the markets. Because, for beans to go up by 5.5 times, that is serious money. And I mean, there's a lot of big money on the Chicago Board of Trade floor to this day that came from those 3 months in soybeans.
So it was primarily a domestic market before. This is when the world trade started really impacting prices locally.
Right. And believe it or not, this whole thing started when there was a anchovy crop failure in Peru.
What?
Yes, because they ground it up for protein. So, and what happened was the protein market started to get tight, super tight, and then they had to come for beans. And, we had a bit of a short crop, and nobody ever thought beans were going to see $5, much less 13 during that thing. So from that day forward, beans went from being a $2, $3, $3.50 item to being a $5, $6 item. And so that's what happened. But yet this was a harbinger of Russia coming in the 74, 75 crops. And then, of course, the Chinese came in 1980. And that was when I actually started on the trading floors. But, the markets have evolved. They've gotten bigger and bigger. But there are milestones where things happen. In 73, 74 beans, are one of those. And believe it or not, there's rumors that Richard Dennis, I don't know if I should be saying this, made $53 million in 1973 trading beans. And that was real money back then.
Yeah, that's real money now.
Yes, it's real money now. But that was the first one. And that was, to this day, that is the big one.
So, and was that partially influenced as well, you said, by Russia entering the market as a buyer?
Yes, but they, believe it or not, they were actually buyers of wheat.
Okay.
So what that was doing was it was pulling apart the protein markets in wheat. And also, then the beans were getting absolutely just run to the export tables before anybody really thought about it. And it was really where we had to rethink everything about the bean crop, what was going on, what was really protein, for critters, and for oil crush. So we didn't really get it right until 1980. And then the Chinese came in and showed us that we actually didn't have it right because we never thought the Chinese would come in. And I mean, they came in the first time and almost took me out. I mean, I was short an old crop, new crop spread in 1980. They just took me to rack.
Yeah, just move the market.
Yes. And they bought like 4 million tons over a weekend, which is colossal. But anyway, back to 73, 74, that was, that made tons and tons of people famous at the Board of Trade.
Yep. And you said reset the level from $2 to $3 beans to $5 to $6 beans is the typical.
Exactly. And that was the first thing, because when I was really trading beans or trading wheat and beans as a trader back in Chicago, I mean, $6 beans were not all that uncommon. And a couple things happen, you get 9, 10. But that was always the thing. We had a button at the Board of Trade, beans in the teens.
Yeah.
And that was what everybody wanted. But it didn't happen until later when we had some actual price and inflation structures under beans to do it. And then what next up is 1988, the biggest drought of my career. I made a fortune in wheat trading that year. I caught the spring wheat crop dead right, and I made money 43 straight days. I mean, big money, because I caught that thing and I got out just 2 days before it crashed. 2 days.
What was going on? How did you get out?
Well, I'm a farm kid. I was walking to the Board of Trade, my usual, and see that summer we had hundreds, 102, 104s, and we had old people dying in Chicago in those buildings, because the thing is, those buildings are built like ovens to hold in heat. And we don't get 104s, 105s downtown very often, not that close to the lake. And then I was walking to the Board of Trade that day, and the air felt moisture. I felt moisture in the air. And it was like dry as a bone all summer. I mean, it didn't rain for like 40 days. And then all of a sudden it felt moist. And I said, okay. And I just started that day unloading, because I had a huge position. And it took me 2 days to get out. And the next day I went to a Cubs game, and it poured like a you-know-what. Just poured. And then that was it. It was game over. But, this was the worst drought of my lifetime. And there was rumors that there was a spring wheat out there that was 8 inches tall, and they literally had to run the combine right at the ground to catch it.
Wow!
And the crop went from expecting 450 to 500 million bushels to 189, and that just shows the danger, because spring wheat just exploded. And I was long there against Chicago, long the spreads. I mean, long everything in Minneapolis and short everything else. And just took them all to the rack.
And how did that impact the corn and beans markets, or was this primarily in wheat?
Well, the thing is that they're all interconnected by protein. Okay, wheat is in the feed channels, because if wheat doesn't make milling grade, it becomes feed grade and goes right out to the feedlots, especially in western Kansas, out in the high plains. So if the wheat crop struggles, it doesn't make milling grade, it goes right into the channels, and then corn goes into the crapper, because people said, well, we're going to buy corn, but wheat's just sitting here. Yeah. And wheat always finds a market. But on the other side, milling grade wheat is protein for humans, and is part of the protein cycle. Because if you think about it, we eat meat, but those critters eat corn and beans, which is how they process protein into something we eat anyway. So, it's one of those where, the king of the world in 1973 was soybeans. The king of the world in 88 was wheat, spring wheat especially.
So, and were there any implications after that, or was this more like a 1 year, one-off event?
Well, the thing is that I've been around a long time. This was the first drought, and the only drought I've ever seen, where the game was over by the middle of June. So it was super hot in May and early June, and I was done for the year on 1st of July.
So it was that bad? They knew there's no hopium left?
Well, yeah. And the thing is, if you think about it, wheat has a different growing cycle than corn and beans, and it hit to wheat at absolutely the worst time. Okay, corn and beans were still growing, and it was dried hot.
But they could at least recover.
They were not damaged that bad yet. I mean, they ran them up pretty good and hard in 88 as well. But the real droughts that affect corn and beans they hit August. Late July, early August, on into Labor Day, and that's when they're flowering. That's when there's silking and that sort of thing, and they just don't like that kind of heat. But that's why the drought in 2012 was a more of an August kind of a drought. It really took that market up. But 1988 reset everything in wheat, all the wheats. And then we also learned the real danger of spring wheat and being shorted. It was there was just no home.
Yeah. In another weather-driven year, 1996, that was a freeze event, right? That
exactly
caught the market.
Yeah, we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, and that was April 15th, 1996. I remember it as if it was yesterday. All of a sudden, we got a report that it was 15 degrees in Amarillo for 8 hours, and there was reports that the entire crop out there was dead. I mean, black dead. And I mean, this thing went like a skyrocket that day. One of my buddies on the Kansas City floor He was short a bit of it, and he said, I got to see this for myself, and drove all the way out across Kansas to see it. And he came back. He said, "Oh shit, we were in trouble."
Yeah,
because it was literally black and it was gone. But what happens with wheat? See, you plant it in the fall, and then it comes out of dormancy, and then if it flowers, it gets killed. Everybody forgets though that the corm underneath this thing tillers. And this thing tillered and brought up shoots. Brought up shoots, and Kansas had a 400 million crop, and it went like one of these.
Whoa!
But
an elevator.
Yeah, it was brutal, and I caught that pretty good too. And it was one of those where, it blew through the frames. It put wheat went $1 higher than it's ever been before. So we went from being a 550, 570 top of all time, and we put out 677.
Okay. In
wheat that year. So it was really something. And we began to see wheat going from a $350 pricing of a crop to $4.55, and corn went from a $2.50 to $3. So each one of these, they were all stepping up.
Little stair step up.
Exactly.
So the other thing from this, you mentioned your friend driving out there to see it for himself. This is when people started using the Landsat imagery and starting to look at some other data sources. So incorporating data and other visualizations. And
the thing is that they begin to realize that we had the technology, but nobody really put it to use yet. Which was that real-time information is like super important if you got a big position on. And now you can use these satellites. I mean, they got people who know where every frickin' oil freighter isn't on the earth and where it's pointing, and all from satellites, and of course the weather, the photosynthesis, you can now tell from the satellites and stuff like that. So we talk about big data, but people don't realize how big data is
and how detailed it is.
And how detailed it is. And it's really about, if you could actually get a computer big enough, which is what we've been working on, you can actually cut across this data and make some analytical projections.
2008. I mean, that year is burned in everybody's brains for the market crash there. But what was going on with the grains and in the commodities?
Well, I tell you what, if you'd have been long limit in wheat and short limit in the S&Ps, you could probably buy and sell Warren Buffett a couple times over. That was absolutely the trade of the century. I mean, the stock market went from 11 or 12,000 down to 6, and spring went from $6 to 25, and that was one of the famous episodes when we had a government entity called the Canadian Wheat Board and the Australian Wheat Board got short early and got belligerent, and then you could tell what happens when you're short that much. And the Canadian Wheat Board was short like 80% of the entire Canadian crop at $9. And by the next Monday, it was $12 bid in Minneapolis.
Ooh.
And the farmers would not sell to the Canadian Wheat Board because it was $12 bid over, down in Minneapolis. And then it really took off. And the thing about spring wheat, it's protein. It's 14% protein, and it's not replaceable. Okay, you can't use hard wheat because that's 11.5% protein. You can't use red wheat in Chicago because that's 9% protein.
So what things do you make with the 14% protein?
That's pizza. Those are bagels. Some of the more stiff gluten breads.
Okay,
and that sort of thing. And it's the king of wheats. It really is. But yet the thing is that you can't blend up. You can only blend down.
Yeah, you can't make that bagel or pizza if you don't have
that
specific
protein. That protein. And they said the carrot was 53 million bushels, which is like nothing. And I knew better than that. There was really no wheat out there.
Oh, so they said there was more stocks remaining than there
were?
Well,
the thing is, had they really said what the carrot truly was, I mean, there was no place spring wheat could not have gone. I mean, literally. And everybody knew who was short. Everybody knew what was going on. And of course, the famous day, February 28th, 2008. When
what happened that day?
Well, they took the limits off spring wheat.
Really?
Yeah, because there was so much open interest, there was just no way they could trade because there were so many limit locks. So they just took the limits off, and it was traded at $18, and traded 25 that day, dollars, closed at 24.
Wow.
And ready for this? The March, May was $4.20 over inverse. Just the March, May. And then the next day it's back to 18.
Wow.
And
that's some whiplash.
Yeah, it was whiplash, and that was the end of the Canadian wheat board and the Australian wheat board, because they got the calls, the margin calls, and it was like $3 billion. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Done.
Oh, it was done. But what that did was it showed the absolute danger of being short protein if you really don't know the game. And that should, when we talk about Sybil, being so dangerous. I mean, that's what Sybil is the wheat market, and she is extremely dangerous. And if you get caught, because if you get caught the protein, you're just going to get wrecked. Wrecked.
So, all right. And any other events between 2008? You mentioned 2012, but that was more some residual from the run-ups from 2008.
Ironic, believe it or not, the 838 high in corn was within our trading frames.
Yeah.
And because of what happened in 2008. Okay. So what happened is, we put a couple of sevens out, sevens in 08 and sevens in 10 when the Russians had some problems and cut off their exports. So between 8, 10, and 12, I mean, we had quite a bit of turbulence, which means you got big standard deviations. So 838 was well within frame.
Yeah.
I mean, it was 50 cents inside.
Well, and also what was going on was the ethanol boom was happening then. So it took a little bit to get that supply and demand back normalized again with some new entrants in the marketplace, both on the supply and demand side.
Exactly. I mean, if you really look at, you started 04, 05, 06, 07, and 08, and then you see the uptick. I mean, we went from, like a billion, bushels of corn into ethanol to 5, and it really disrupted the market, but yet the market performed and took it up. But, that's when corn now moved to a higher level, because ethanol is underpinning this thing. We're still using 5-6 billion bushels of corn per year to make ethanol, which is, great, but yet, it's really, that's a lot of acres.
Yeah. But then in 2014 and stuff, that it started normalizing back down closer to the, coming back down towards the cost of production.
Well, we talked about this, and even I talked about it on CME radio with Anthony Credelli, and, high prices cure high prices, but insanely high prices bring about competition. And, we talk about Brazil being not even on the map in 1990, and now they're bigger than us in beans, and Russia came out of nowhere and was a 35 million ton producer of wheat. Now they're 80, and we only produce 65 million tons of wheat here in the United States, all of it. So they're actually bigger than us. So these prices brought these people into the market. Of course, Argentina's doubled their production of everything, and as has Brazil. Brazil's almost tripled. And then, of course, Europe continues on. And, one of these days, Africa's going to get their shit together. And all you have to do is look at a map. There's plenty of, arable farmland there if they could actually get it together.
Yep. So 2020, end of 2020 and into 2021 now, what's driving the prices where they're at now?
Well, what I like to say is that, 15, 16, 17, and 18, and most of 19, we put the market to sleep. I mean, if you look at when I was actually building, I looked at this just the other day. When I was building Croptomize back in 2015, the standard deviation for corn for our frames was like 117. Last year it was like 22. So it was like the market was just asleep and very low volatility. And it was a matter of when it was going to happen. The frame was going to get blown because it was just so tight. And this is why I really don't care about this, because, what this is doing is showing where the market really wants to go. But what happened was, China was playing games. They were able to play games because they lost, 3, 4, 500 million hogs. And of course, they're feeding them 20 pounds a day. And I mean, that just devastated the bean market, as you well know. We were looking at possibly having a 1.5 billion bushel carryout. Now it's like 120 million. So what happened was that the Chinese just got aggressive about their hog herds. And now the hog herd is supposedly 30% larger than before this thing started. But they are, they are super paranoid about not having stocks. So they are getting this stuff, sent to them so they can continue to build stocks and not rely on us, bad Westerners, whatever they call us. Well, I don't know what they call us, but I'm not going to say it on tape. So at any rate, it was just a matter of when they did that. But these prices are going to bring out, new acres, because I guarantee you they're going to put out another 10 million hectares in Russia alone. And I keep hearing that the number of acres in Brazil coming up for this next bean crop is going to astonish you. So, we're looking probably at 150, 160.
Yeah.
And I still can't believe, to this day, we talked about this 2-3 weeks ago. I still don't believe that the farmers planted 86 million bushels or acres. I don't believe it. I think they planted 90, 91, and I'll stand by it.
Yeah.
And we'll see who's right at, come August, August and September.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, thanks for giving some of that context and, looking back at some of the data and what was going on when we saw different spikes in the market and how to interpret it going forward.
Yep.
So thanks, Q.
Mm-hmm.